Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into a topic that's sure to, well, it's going to twist your brain a little bit, but in a fun way. We're talking about words that are their own opposites, these tricky little things called contronyms.
It really makes you realize that language, it's not always straightforward. Contronyms show us how a single word can, believe it or not, have two completely opposite meanings.
It's true, and you might be surprised just how many of these words we use every day without even realizing it. For this deep dive, we've got a whole stack of articles from Grammarly, Wikipedia, dictionary.com.
Oh, and Merriam-Webster, too. Don't forget them. They've got a great piece on this.
That's right. And even IDP IELTS Global, they talk about contronyms in the context of language testing, which is fascinating. But one thing that struck me is that even these sources, they use different terms for the same thing. Janus words, auto-antonyms.
Right, like they can't quite decide what to call them. But it's all referring to the same idea, these words that are their own opposites.
Exactly. It's like the linguistic world can't even agree on a name for these things, which just adds to the intrigue, right? So to really get a handle on this, let's look at some examples. The Grammarly article kicks things off with a bunch of verbs. They start with buckle, which for me immediately brings to mind buckling a seatbelt, fastening it.
Of course. But then there's the other meaning of buckle, where your knees buckle under pressure,
Yeah.
meaning to collapse or give way.
It's incredible how one word can encompass these two completely opposite actions, and it makes you wonder, how does that even happen? How do words end up with such contradictory meanings?
Well, a lot of times it's through a process called semantic broadening. Now, that might sound complicated, but it basically just means that a word's meaning, it kind of evolves over time. Sometimes those changes lead to, well, opposite meanings.
And their example of dust really highlights this. We all know what it means to dust, right? To remove dust from furniture, shelves, all that. But then you have bakers dusting a cake with powdered sugar, which is essentially adding dust.
The same word can describe both adding and taking away, depending on the context.
It's all about context. The words around it, the way it's used in a sentence, those clues tell us which meaning is intended. Speaking of words with multiple meanings, the dictionary.com article mentions overlook. And this is a great example of how contronyms can lead to some, well, let's just say interesting situations. If you overlook something, you might think it means to supervise it carefully.
To really keep a close eye on it, make sure everything's in order.
Exactly. But then you have the other meaning of overlook, which means to miss something completely, like overlooking a typo in an important document.
It's enough to make your head spin,
Yeah.
which just goes to show how important it is to be aware of these double meanings.
Now, we've been talking about how a word's meaning can sort of broaden over time, but the Wikipedia article, they point out that sometimes these contronyms, they come from two completely different words that just happen to, well, sound the same.
Precisely. And they use the word cleave as an example.
Cleave. Now, there's a word that always trips me up.
One cleave means to split or separate, while the other cleave, and this one comes from a completely different origin, mind you, means to cling to or adhere closely. It's actually quite remarkable how language can be so, well, complex and full of these little surprises.
It really shows you how much history is packed into the words we use every day. And sanction is another one from the dictionary.com article that, well, it always gets me thinking.
Sanction. Now, there's a word with a lot of weight behind it. It can be tricky because it often pops up in discussions about international relations and, things can get a little complicated.
Exactly. Because on the one hand, if something is sanctioned, it means it's been approved, given the official okay. Like, a project might be sanctioned by a government agency.
But then, and this is where it gets interesting, sanction can also refer to penalties or punishments, like imposing sanctions on a country for violating international law.
So the same word can mean to approve and to punish. It's really a two-faced word, isn't it? Kind of like fast.
Fast. Ah, yes, another classic example of a contronym. We use it all the time to describe something moving quickly, like a fast car or a fast runner.
But then you have fast in the sense of being stuck or fixed in place. Like if something is held fast, it's not going anywhere.
Two completely opposite meanings, and yet both perfectly valid depending on how the word is used. Language is full of these little quirks.
And left is another one that always throws me for a loop. If someone left a party, well, obviously they went away. But if we're talking about the people left at the party.
Then we mean the ones who stayed behind. The word changes meaning depending on its position in the sentence. It's fascinating.
It's like you need a linguistic decoder ring just to keep up. But on a more serious note, all this talk about wordplay and double meanings, it's certainly entertaining. But you might be wondering, why should we even care? Is this just a fun linguistic quirk, or is there more to it?
That's a question I'm glad you asked, because understanding contronyms, it's not just about appreciating the complexities of language. It can actually make us better communicators.
It's like they say words have power, and the more we understand about how they work, the more effectively we can use them, right?
Absolutely. And, this is especially important for people who are learning English as a second language.
Oh, I can only imagine. Trying to navigate a new language is hard enough without words changing meanings on you.
Exactly. It just highlights how important it is to pay attention to context, to the clues that tell us which meaning is intended.
It's like learning a secret code. And speaking of learning, the IDP IELTS Global article, they mention that contronyms are sometimes used in language proficiency tests. Can you believe that?
It makes sense, though, doesn't it? If you can understand and use contronyms correctly, it shows a deeper understanding of the language.
It's like the advanced level of vocabulary. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of contronyms, what are some key takeaways? What have we learned from all these articles?
Well, first and foremost, we've learned that words can be tricky. They can have multiple meanings, sometimes even opposite meanings, and it's our job as communicators to make sure we're using them in a way that's clear and unambiguous.
And we've seen how these double meanings can arise, whether it's through semantic broadening or just, well, linguistic coincidence. But at the end of the day, it all adds to the richness and complexity of the English language.
It certainly does. It makes you realize that language is never static, it's constantly evolving, and there's always something new to discover, even for native speakers.
It's a journey of lifelong learning, isn't it? And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Until next time.
Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll see you on our next linguistic adventure.